First of all, I've got to apologize for the long hiatus and not posting videos. I've been creating something and I think that y'all will love it once I release it. But anyways, so today's video is quite short, but it's just that I wanted to share the few things that I did to get from a D grade to a B grade for biology. And it's not that impressive, but it's about 2 grades. So why not? So long story short, I had to relearn 22 chapters of biology in about 1 to 2 months for my A levels. And I was also surprised that I improved by 2 grades. And these are the 4 changes that I made to improve it. So the first thing is I started to write nonlinear notes. So what does that even mean? As you can see on the left, linear notes is like writing line by line, bullet points, and just like no sort of spatial arrangement or arrows or any sort of way to sort of represent the information in a different way, as you can see on the right. Not saying this is just an example, so usually I would do a mini mind map using arrows, spatial arrangement on the page. Sometimes I will still do bullet points. Sometimes I will have question marks on whether this representation is better. But what I'm doing is basically just representing the notes in a way that represents the way it is in my mind. And that's why I think it's called a mind map. But anyways, and what you're doing is trying to detect where the gaps in your knowledge are. So for example here, the example here, I have like a question mark here because I do not know whether this point leads to this point. And so when I relearn the information or sort of read about it, I know where my gaps are, and as a result, my effort is put into fixing my constraints instead of just relearning the stuff that I actually already know. So, yep, that's the first point. And this also ties into the second change, which is grouping information. So, what grouping information does is actually to increase your level of expertise and the knowledge at a topic, sorry. So, how does that achieve expertise? So first of all, does help it it does help you to remember larger chunks of information. So for example, if you have 10 pieces of information and you just need to remember it for a test, what we usually do is just brute force memorize, rote memorize, that's it. You can memorize them one by one and just regurgitate when the test occurs. And if you've done that before, you would know that that spends a lot of brain power. And you know that you don't only have 10 things to remember. So I think that's why we all struggle. So what we want to do is to group information in the sense that it's like bringing a bag to store the information, and different information is stored in different bags essentially. So when you need to regurgitate out the information, you just open the bag and open the relevant bag and take out the information. So of course this takes a lot of brain power because at the start it is easier to just memorize the stuff. But afterwards you will realize that the more information there is, the more you need to group it to make things easier for you. So yeah, do remember to group information if you can see the obvious groups, or actually spend the brain power to stop and actually think. Which actually brings me to the next point, which is think before you write. So this grouping of information, you cannot do it on the spot, usually, because it's very difficult to listen to someone speaking or a teacher or teaching and then be like, okay, this can be grouped like this. So what you want to do is to stop and think before you actually write stuff down. Because if you just write down everything your teacher says, word for word, or copy notes, you will not have time to use your brain power to actually process it, and therefore you wouldn't be grouping information. And another benefit of thinking before you write is that it helps you to write notes that actually make sense for you. Like, what do I mean by that? Because when the teacher teaches you something, it is based on the way that the teacher sees it, as it makes the most sense to the teacher, if it makes sense at all. So when the teacher teaches you, she or he does not know what prior knowledge you have, and therefore it is packaged in a way that would make more sense to the teacher but lesser sense to you. So what you're supposed to do is not to just copy down word for word, but rather to repackage it and make it your own. And obviously it is near impossible to do that if you don't stop and think, because you're just gonna write word for word. And this leads to the fourth point and the last point. It's constant retrieval. So what this does is for me to not forget so much of the information. You'll still forget because you're gonna forget. But you want to minimize that. And to do that, you want to do consistent retrieval or revision sessions, essentially. So revision or retrieval are like the basic shit, which is doing practice papers, of course. Or you can do a brain dump, which is spamming everything you know of a topic on a piece of paper. To find gaps, like mentioned earlier. Or you can teach an imaginary student, and so on and so forth. But the main point here is consistent. So what you want to do is, before you forget everything and have to relearn it, you want to do revision sessions. And not just leave it to like 2 weeks before the exam. Actually no, 2 days before the exam. And you have like multiple chapters that you have forgotten all over and you need to revise all over again. And that is what revision sessions are for, or retrieval essentially. As a side note, you want to retrieve or revise in a way that involves you to think, and it may feel uncomfortable because when you do practice papers, usually it's not comfortable, it's draining, and you spend a lot of brain power. But that is good difficulty. So if you don't feel that difficulty, then it's a bad sign. So to reiterate, the fourth point is for you to refresh your memory and improve the knowledge mastery in your mind. You have to do consistent revision or retrieval sessions. And therefore, you wouldn't forget so much and learn better. So, yep, bye bye.